Let's talk about Passkey in this video. Passkey is becoming a popular alternative for password-based authentication, and Passkey is a passwordless authentication. So before going into the details of how Passkey works, let's first take a look at how traditional username and password-based authentication works. Let's imagine that we have some sort of online service. Let's imagine that this is your Gmail. And in order to use Gmail, you first sign up with Gmail, and when you sign up, you set your username and password. Once the account got created, whenever you want to access your Gmail, you log in with your username and password, and that username and password goes to the Gmail server, and Gmail server makes sure it matches with the record that it has internally. Once the check is done, and if the records match, then the authentication will be successful, and you'll be redirected to the inbox of your Gmail, and you'll be able to access your Gmail as normal. So this is how password-based authentication works. Now, there are many problems with the password-based authentication. One of them is that you need to remember this password for Gmail account. So imagine that you have many such online services that you have access to, and for each one of them you have different passwords, because that is the best practice. It is not recommended to use same password across multiple accounts. So for each of the online services, you probably will have a password on its own, and you need to remember each of those passwords, which is not going to be easy, right? If you have 100 services, and for each one of them if you have different passwords, then it's not going to be easy. Luckily, we have password managers, and those password managers are going to help us to manage these passwords. But that is just one of the problems. The other problem is the password that you set might be a weak password, which means it could easily be guessed by someone, or they could even employ something like brute force attack to discover the password that you have. So if you have weak password, then that is another problem. So, and I can go on, there are many such problems that you can actually associate with password-based authentication. So industry has been trying to move away from password-based authentication for a while, and they finally landed on Passkey. Passkey is becoming popular since last year. So let's understand how Passkey works. Before understanding how Passkey works, we need to understand how asymmetric encryption works, because asymmetric encryption is the underlying technology that enables Passkey. So let's take a quick detour on asymmetric encryption. Normally, we have two types of encryption. One is asymmetric encryption and the other one is symmetric encryption. In symmetric encryption, we'll have same key for both encryption and decryption. But in asymmetric encryption, we'll have one key for encryption and another key for decryption. Usually, we'll refer to one of those keys as private key and the other key as public key. The private key could be any of those keys actually. It could be the encryption key or it could be the decryption key, and the other key will be the public key. But in the context of Passkey, we'll be treating the encryption key as private key and the decryption key as public key. Okay, so this changes depending on the application. So in some application, you'll be using the encryption key as public key and decryption key as private key. But for Passkey, you'll be using encryption key as private key and decryption key as public key. So we call this private key because this key, the encryption key, is only stored in your device and it is not shared with your server. And the public key, which is actually the decryption key, is shared with your server. In this case, it will be shared with your Gmail server. And the key which is stored in your device can only be accessed with device security. So if it is a mobile device or desktop, you might have some sort of mechanism to unlock that. It could be biometric based or password or pin based. You need to use that to access your private key. Okay, so even though the private key is stored in the device, it cannot be accessed by anyone. It can only be accessed by someone who can access that device itself. So if you have a password based or biometric authentication for the device, you need to use that to unlock the device. Only then the private key can be used. Okay, so these are some side information to know before go into the details of Passkey. Now that is out of our way, let's focus on how Passkey based authentication works. So first of all, just like traditional username and password based authentication, if you want to use Passkey for authentication, you need to register that with the server first. So the first time when you log in using the username and password authentication, you can enable Passkey based authentication. And when you enable Passkey based authentication, the device is going to generate a pair of keys. It is going to generate private key and public key. And the private key is going to stay within the device and the public key will be shared with your server. Now this public key represents your username and password. Not just the password, it represents both your username and password. Okay. Now once the registration is done, maybe you want to log into your Gmail with passkey based authentication. As soon as you selected passkey based authentication as an option, when you log in, the server is going to send something called challenge to the device. This challenge is nothing but a sequence of characters, and this device is going to encrypt that sequence of characters using the private key pair of the public key that server has. Okay, so this public key is the key that represents your account, and this public key has a paired private key, and that private key lives only in your device. And you get the challenge from the server, and that challenge is going to be encrypted by this private key. And once it is encrypted, the encrypted cipher is sent back to the server. And this cipher can only be decrypted with the matching public key, and the server already has this public key. So it decrypts the cipher and it checks whether it matches the initial challenge that it had sent. If it does match, then the authentication is successful. It sends the authentication successful signal to the device, and the user will be redirected to the inbox of their Gmail account. Okay, so this is how at a high level passkey based authentication works. So this essentially removed the requirement to remember the password, and once passkey based authentication is registered, it replaces both username and password. So this is how passkey based authentication works at a high level. Now let's understand why passkey based authentication is better. As we previously seen, this is better than just password based authentication because it's not going to be weak. No one can guess your password, or no one can use some sort of brute force algorithm to discover your password. That is not going to be easy. So in general, in terms of security, this is better than password based, and we don't need to memorize anything. We don't need to remember the password that you set for many different accounts online. So the keys are generated by your device and they are stored in your device, and whenever you want to access the service, you'll be able to access them as long as you are able to unlock your device using biometric, PIN or password based mechanism that you set up on your device. Okay, so the only thing that you need to remember is how to unlock your device. If it is password based, you still need to remember the password for the device, but that is much better than remembering 100 different passwords for 100 different services that you use online. And thirdly, this is cross-platform. So Passkey is supported in all major platforms including macOS, Windows, Android and iPhone. So we don't need to worry about not being able to use this in one of the platforms. So that is not the case. And finally, this also replaces the multi-factor authentication. Because the password being weak and it could be guessed or brute forced, we wanted an additional layer of security, and that's where this multi-factor authentication came into existence. And because Passkey is inherently stronger than password based authentication, we don't need to rely on multi-factor authentication. So Passkey based authentication replaces password as well as multi-factor authentication. So this Passkey is built on Web Authentication API standards, also known as WebAuthn, and we have support for this in all major browsers. Okay. One more thing to know about this Passkey is that the device itself stores the private key in a secure isolated area within the device itself. Okay, so this is not going to be stored in a normal place that you normally store your other files and data. The private key will be stored in a special place, and this will change from a platform to platform. But the thing is, that will be a secure and isolated area. For example, if you take macOS as an example, there is something called security enclave, which is isolated from the main processor, and that is where all the sensitive information like pins, passwords and those kind of things are stored, and that is where the private key for your passkey will also be stored. And similarly on Windows side, we have something called TPM, which is Trusted Platform Module, and that provides similar functionality. So even if the device gets compromised, the attacker will not be able to recover your private keys to use them without your knowledge. So that will not happen. So we don't need to worry about hacker getting hold of your private key either. Okay. And one final thing that I wanted to share about Passkey is that you can have one passkey per account shared across all the devices, or you can have one passkey per account per device as well. So let's say, for example, you have a mobile device, and on that mobile device, you have set up the passkey based authentication for your Gmail account. Now, the private key of the passkey lives inside this particular device. If you are trying to access your Gmail account from a laptop, for example, and on the laptop, you don't have the private key of your passkey, but you wanted to use passkey for the authentication. You wanted to use your existing passkey. You don't want to create a new passkey for your Gmail on this device. So what you can do is, if you choose an option to use Passkey from another device, your laptop will present a QR code. So this option can be selected when you're trying to log into your Gmail account. When you're trying to log into Gmail, you'll select use Passkey from another device as an option. When you select that, the QR code will be presented. And when you scan that QR code on your mobile device, which is where the private key exists, the private key will be sent to the server and it will do all the checks that we do here. And once the check is successful, the auth success will be sent to the laptop. And from the laptop, you'll be able to access your Gmail inbox. So this is how the passkey in one device is used for the authentication on another device. And we could also sync the passkey. So the passkey from this device can also be copied into this device. Or alternatively, you could have different passkey for the same account on different devices. So you'll have one passkey for this device and another passkey for this device for the same Gmail account. So that is also possible. So all these different combinations are possible, which makes our lives much more easier because it provides better security and we don't need to remember all these passwords. Now, I found this particular demo app very, very useful to understand how passkey based authentication works. Let's look at it next. Now I am here in this demo site, and this demo site is from Google, by the way. I'll put the link to the site in the description so you can play with it yourself. So now here, if I click on this username, you'll be able to see that I get this option called user passkey. So if I select this, I get this QR code because I don't have any passkey set up for this particular website on this device. So that is why I get this option. So if I have set up a passkey for this particular website in another device, then I'll be able to scan this QR code on that device. Then that device will send the passkey to the server and the server will validate it, and if everything goes okay, authentication will be successful for me on this device. So this is how you'll be able to use the passkey on another device to log in this device. But I'm not going to do this. Let's go ahead and set up a passkey on this device. Okay, so I'm going to click on this and I'm going to first log in with username and password, because before setting up a passkey you should be able to log into the site somehow. In this case, I'm going to use username and password for signing in. Because this is a demo app, it accepts any username and password as a valid username and password. So I'm just going to type in some username and password so we'll be able to access the main page of this website. So now I have signed in with the username and password. I am in the home page and here it shows that I don't have any registered passkeys for this particular website. And it also gives me an option to create a passkey. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to click on this create a passkey. Now, because I am on incognito mode, it wants me that the passkey that you're going to create will be saved outside of incognito mode, as in it will be saved in your password manager. Are you happy with that? I'm going to say yes. So I'm going to click continue. Now, this device that I am accessing, this device can be unlocked using my fingerprint. Okay, so before the passkey can be created, it needs to verify that I am authorized to create this passkey on this device. And it does that by asking me to unlock this device. So I'm going to unlock this device using my fingerprint. And I just unlocked it. As soon as the unlocking is done, it is creating the pair of keys behind the scene. And it sends the public key to the server. And it saves the private key on the device itself. Now it has done that. And we'll be able to see that it has one passkey, and that passkey is stored in a Google's password manager, which means if I use the same password manager in another device, I'll simply be able to access the private key stored in the password manager. Okay. Now we have created the passkey. Let me log out and log in again, but this time using passkey. So I'm going to click sign out. Now we are back in the login page. If I click on this again now, this time if you see here, I get this additional option. It presents this passkey as one of the option, and this passkey is coming from Google's password manager. Okay, so I'm going to select this. When I select this, it again asks me to unlock the device because it needs to verify that I am allowed to use this device. So when I unlock the device using my fingerprint, it will do the challenge and response thing behind the scene, and it will send me to the home page as an authenticated user. So let me unlock this device. So as soon as I have unlocked, you can see that it did all the things behind the scene and it sent me back to the home page as an authenticated user. So this is how passkey works at a very, very high level. I hope this video is useful. Thank you.